Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Natalia Martinez. Natalia Martinez was born in the late 1980s in Montevideo, the capital of Uruguay, and she was the youngest daughter in her family. While not much is known about her personality, she had a close relationship with her relatives, especially her older sister, Claudia. Her father was a senior salesman for a large international company that sold household appliances, which allowed the family to live comfortably. Natalia was a cheerful and friendly girl. During her teenage years, she formed a close-knit group of friends who supported one another during difficult times. These friends later described her as sociable and able to connect easily with strangers. After graduating from high school, Natalia began spending more time with her friends. They enjoyed going to various parties and eventually expanded their adventures by visiting the beaches of Uruguay for fun. To celebrate her 19th birthday on January 1st, 2007, Natalia and her friends planned a trip to La Paloma, a small resort town, where they stayed for 2 weeks. On January 16th, they traveled to a nearby resort in the city of Reales, where Natalia was delighted to meet her parents and sister, who were there for a 4-day vacation. The Natalia family had a wonderful time enjoying beach activities and were well known in the town, as they frequently visited. They often returned to the same places, making it feel like a second home. On January 18th, Natalia and her sister Claudia decided to drive to Punta del Este, another tourist town less than an hour away from Reales. They planned to stop at a popular local spa located about halfway between the two towns in the Serra San Antonio area. After their beauty treatment, the girls planned to go to a disco with 3 of Natalia's friends. However, as the evening approached, Claudia felt very tired and decided to go home to their parents. Despite this, 19-year-old Natalia Martinez was determined to stick to her plans. She wanted to enjoy herself, so she went with her friends to a popular party at the local nightclub, La Arena Canada, where they stayed until around 5 a.m. As morning approached, the girls decided to leave the party and head home. At that time, Natalia was talking with a man named Leonardo Roccovan, an old acquaintance who owned a bookstore. They stopped near the exit and continued their conversation. However, Natalia became so engrossed in her discussion with Leonardo that her friends decided to go outside and get into the car they had arrived in, planning to head home together. The girls got tired and got into the car. One of them decided to check on Natalia, but when they returned to the nightclub, they found that Natalia and Leonardo were gone. The friends realized that Natalia could not have left alone or with anyone else without letting them know. Since they did not see her leave, they began to worry. They went up to the second floor, out of the bar, and saw Leonardo's BMW in the parking lot. The owner was inside the car, and because the windows were tinted, Rosalia and Silva could not see if anyone was in the passenger seat. However, they did notice some movement inside the car. The girls called out to Leonardo to ask about Natalia. He said he was in the car with a friend and mentioned that he had spoken to Natalia briefly before they parted ways. He claimed he had no idea what happened to her afterward or why she didn't return to her friends. The girls assumed Natalia had gone home, so they got into the car and drove to her friends' relatives, who were at the police station, just a 10-minute drive from the club. Rosalia and Silva stopped near the house and honked to get Claudia's attention, trying not to wake the entire family. However, no one responded, so they returned to the club where they last saw Natalia. The girls continued to search for their friend for about 2 hours, but their efforts were unsuccessful. No one knew where she had gone. Around 8 a.m., Silva returned home, exhausted and very worried about her missing friend. Worried about her friend's safety, she decided to tell her parents everything that had happened. She feared something bad might have happened to her friend. Her parents tried to reassure her, telling her to rest and that her friend was probably already home. So, she went to bed. Yet, when she woke up at 11 a.m. that same day, her concerns grew stronger. The entire Natalia family started searching for she. They quickly got involved, and her friends went to the club together to find out what happened. Unfortunately, they were still unsuccessful. The club was closed, and no one had any helpful information. They searched the surrounding area for clues but found nothing. Around 5 p.m., Natalia's family and friends arrived at the police station. Maldonado police investigators received several photos, including one of all the girls relaxing at a club that evening. This helped them understand what the missing girl was wearing so they could come up with a description for the search. The police took their statements seriously and began investigating. Initially, the family said that Natalia had been at a party where she may have had too much to drink and left with someone. However, Rosalia and Silva insisted that Natalia had not consumed any alcohol that night, as she often denied. They also dismissed the police's suspicions that they had used illegal drugs. Police began a search operation. They first went to the location where Natalia was last seen. The club was open, but there were no surveillance cameras at the time. Police spoke to club employees and learned that a group of 3 young men sitting at a nearby table had been trying to approach the women throughout the evening. Natalia's friends confirmed that the men had been harassing them. Despite this information, police ignored the group of young men and instead focused on the acquaintance with whom Natalia had been talking before she disappeared. It was no surprise that Leonardo immediately became the prime suspect, since he was the last person to see Natalia. However, all of Leonardo's acquaintances described him as a kind and calm person who had never shown any signs of cruelty before and was incapable of harming anyone. He was a young businessman. That night, his girlfriend waited for him in the car while he was talking to Natalia. After that, he said goodbye to Natalia and returned to the car with his girlfriend. From the car, he saw Natalia go down the stairs and go out onto the porch. From that moment on, Leonardo was distracted by his conversation with his girlfriend and did not see Natalia again. However, he was not worried about her, since he did not notice anything suspicious around. No one was screaming or making noise. Despite the police's suspicions, Leonardo insisted he had nothing to do with Natalia's disappearance. However, the police did not trust him. They needed to conduct a thorough examination of the BMW he drove away in after the party. Several witnesses reported seeing a similar car in various locations around the city, including near a forest on the outskirts. One man claimed he spotted a couple having sex in a car that matched the description on the night she went missing, near a lake by the woods. Police obtained a search warrant for Leonardo's car. During the initial inspection, they found a long, dark hair on the floor of the BMW and sent it for analysis. However, it did not match Natalia. It belonged to someone else. The interior of the car showed no signs of suspicious activity, no blood, or evidence of a struggle. Police speculated that Leonardo had cleaned the car shortly after Natalia Martinez disappeared, which would explain the clean condition of the car. Police used this detail as part of the evidence against Leonardo. However, they still lacked the evidence to arrest him. On January 22nd, a passerby driving on the outskirts of Polis discovered several items on the roadside. Among them were a woman's handbag containing a wallet and a pair of women's shoes. The most crucial piece of evidence was linked to Natalia Martinez, a case that was currently receiving significant media attention. Recognizing the situation, the witness promptly contacted the police. Unfortunately, the media coverage also led to the spread of various rumors, which Natalia's family had to repeatedly deny. One such rumor suggested that Natalia was involved with drug dealers, implying that she had become a victim of criminal activities. However, Natalia's father publicly refuted these claims in an official television statement. Despite the situation, rumors continued to spread. Some claimed to have witnessed her being attacked or even murdered. Instead of receiving assistance from the media, police found themselves overwhelmed by numerous false testimonies each day that needed to be verified, complicating the investigation. Meanwhile, the media eagerly reported even the most outrageous theories. The story was considered compelling and attracted many readers, causing journalists to add fuel to the fire of chaos surrounding the case. The rumors about the missing girl were leveraged to boost newspaper sales. Natalia's family endured immense pain following her disappearance. A large-scale search operation was organized, involving many police officers, friends, family members, and hundreds of volunteers. It was quickly determined that there was no evidence of the girl near the nightclub, prompting the search to extend into more distant areas of Uruguay. Ultimately, the entire coast was thoroughly searched. Most of the search operations took place on land, using service dogs, and later involving military and civilian aircraft. The City Fire Brigade also participated in the search and requested that the sewer systems be inspected. However, no traces of Natalia were found there either. By this point, law enforcement had largely concluded that Natalia was deceased, as the likelihood of finding her alive was very low. The critical window for finding missing persons is usually 48 hours. A significant finding occurred when a bone was discovered on the Grande Plateau, but tests revealed it was not human. Although the search had stalled and no new leads had emerged, Natalia's relatives continued their efforts. They remained hopeful that she was alive and being held against her will. In 2000, a female body was discovered in the forest near Lake Yolo. The body was in poor condition and was sent for examination to determine the identity of the deceased. This location was several kilometers from the club where Natalia was last seen, and the clothing found on the body led police to suspect it might belong to the missing Natalia Martinez. After the discovery of the body, police remembered a couple who had been seen having sex in a car near the forest, which drew attention to that area. The forensic expert who performed the autopsy struggled to gather important information because the body was in an advanced state of decomposition. To ensure a thorough examination, 5 forensic experts were called in. They determined that the body belonged to Natalia Martinez. Their overall assessments suggested that she likely did not die of natural causes, as there were faint signs of strangulation on her neck. Although they ruled out poisoning from substances or alcohol, they could not find evidence of physical or sexual violence due to the body's condition. It was noteworthy that the victim was found tied with nylon thread, but it remained unclear whether this occurred before or after her death. Several months later, while the investigation continued, an unexpected development arose. The man who had found her belongings on the roadside was discovered dead at the bottom of a cliff near his home. His name was initially kept confidential. Initially, it appeared that the man had voluntarily chosen to end his life. However, all his relatives insisted that he would never do such a thing. He was a deeply religious man, cherished his life, and loved his family. An autopsy revealed that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, sustained long before the fall from the cliff, suggesting he had been thrown off. This led police to believe the two cases were linked. But more evidence was needed. The next tragic event involved Natalia's father, Ever Martinez. He had fallen into a deep depression after his daughter's death and the damaging rumors that were circulating about their family. He ended his life at home by shooting himself in the head. His body was discovered by his daughter Claudia and his wife. The police closed the case after confirming that he had acted alone, a conclusion that the family accepted. For a long time, police struggled to make progress in the investigation into Natalia's murder. However, new information emerged from text messages exchanged with a friend just days before Natalia's death. In these conversations, Natalia mentioned a man she had recently met online. It was later discovered that he was one of the men who had been at the nightclub on the day Natalia went missing. These three young men were sitting at a nearby table, and several witnesses had pointed them out from the beginning of the investigation, but this information was overlooked. Police identified all three suspects, who were slightly older than Natalia. After interviewing them, the police became even more suspicious of their involvement, as the men contradicted each other in their statements about where they were and what they did during the night and morning of that tragic day. After this, the police interviewed a witness whose identity was kept confidential for her safety. She was the girlfriend of one of the men who had been arrested. Her testimony revealed that a young man in the group, Rodrigo Verghese, was involved in Natalia's murder. At the time, he was 25 years old, and police later stated that he had previously provided false statements. During the interrogation, police recorded phone conversations that implicated the Rodrigo main suspect. They collected DNA samples from him, but these were not helpful for the investigation due to the advanced decomposition of the remains. After that, the police reached out to the friends and relatives of the Rodrigo. A young man was called to testify on June 8, 2010, along with his friends who had been at a nightclub on the night of Natalia's murder. They all claimed they had no involvement in the incident. They stated that after spending the night at the club, they hired a sex worker to join them in their continued festivities. However, they denied any connection to Natalia. Rodrigo, the prime suspect, denied spending time with the murdered woman and claimed he did not know her. However, messages from the girl revealed that they had spoken online and planned to meet at a party, suggesting that Rodrigo had lied. Initial questioning did not turn up any clues, but a day later, police spoke to the young people again in the hope of getting a confession. This time, Rodrigo confessed. He explained that he had met Natalia online, and after chatting for a while, they decided to meet at a club. Unfortunately, their conversation did not go well, and as dawn approached, he suggested they go to another nearby nightclub. Rodrigo misled her. He wanted to be alone with her. During this time, he began to harass her, according to his confession. When she rejected his advances, he seemed to accept it. However, Natalia then suffered an asthma attack, which led to convulsions and ultimately her death, as she did not have her inhaler or any medication with her. Rodrigo was confused and unable to help her. He stated that he panicked during her attack and didn't know what to do, especially when she stopped showing signs of life in his car. After the party, he planned to return to his family's farm, a short distance from the city. However, after Natalia's death, he decided to dispose of her body to avoid any further repercussions. He headed for the woods, thinking it would be a good place to hide her. There, he tied Natalia up, dragged her deeper into the woods, and covered her body with branches. But this was only part of the story. A witness walking along the beach claimed to have seen a couple having sex, and Natalia's body showed signs of strangulation. It seems that Rodrigo neglected to mention that he had strangled and raped her at the same time. Police were later able to confirm that Rodrigo's other friends were not involved in the incident, so they were released shortly after Rodrigo confessed. Rodrigo was formally charged with murder and taken into custody. After the confession, it appeared that the prosecutor's office would easily prove the Rodrigo's guilt. However, in mid-2010, as preliminary hearings began, Rodrigo Verghese recanted his confession. He claimed he admitted to the murder under police pressure and insisted he did not commit the crime. This assertion seemed unlikely because his confession included numerous details only the actual killer would know, including the precise location where the girl's body was found. Still, Rodrigo maintained his innocence. Despite the evidence against him, his defense team supported his statement and sought to demonstrate that Rodrigo was not at the club that night. They presented mobile phone data and a statement from his employer confirming that he had been working his usual evening shift that day. The next day, he attended a friend's wedding, and no one noticed anything unusual about his behavior. On September 2, 2010, Leonardo Roccovan, the bookstore owner who was initially the main suspect in the investigation, was called as a key witness for the prosecution. Leonardo testified that during a conversation, he had an argument with a young man. Leonardo identified the young man as Rodrigo. This indicated that Rodrigo was definitely at the nightclub and not at work. Natalia's friends also confirmed that he was at the nightclub that night. Forensic experts, working with the prosecution, provided insights based on the autopsy results. They noted that, due to the typical symptoms of asthma, the girl could not have died from an asthma attack so quickly. While she did experience an asthma attack, it could not have occurred instantaneously. It took several hours. Additionally, there were signs of strangulation on the victim's neck, which was likely the cause of death. Unfortunately, the experts could not provide further details about the victim's injuries. From late August to mid-September 2010, the prosecution successfully constructed a narrative of the crime, leading to Rodrigo Verghese being found guilty of Natalia Martinez's murder. He received a 9-year prison sentence. However, in February 2011, Rodrigo's lawyer submitted an appeal, claiming that the court's ruling was incorrect and that the prosecution was biased. The lawyer argued that they failed to present a witness to the kidnapping or murder, nor did they provide any compelling direct evidence. Natalia's family expressed disappointment, saying that the criminal received a lighter sentence than the family had expected. Disappointed by this leniency, Natalia's relatives filed a civil lawsuit against Rodrigo Verghese for causing harm to Natalia's family, holding him responsible for her father's death. Initially, they mentioned that Rodrigo should pay $15 in damages. However, after further discussion, both parties agreed to increase the amount of damages to $7,000. The court rejected the request for a longer sentence. On October 27, 2014, the lawyer achieved his goal when Rodrigo, 29, was pardoned after serving only 4 years and 2 months in prison. His release was largely due to his good behavior while in custody. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Tracy Hallett and J.B. Beasley. J.B. Beasley was born on July 31, 1981, in Troy, Alabama, to Cheryl and Hilton Lanier J.B. After her parents divorced in 1984, J.B. moved to Dothan with her mother. Her mother later married Joey Begun, who became J.B.'s loving stepfather, and she and her 4 sisters grew up in a house in Dothan. She was an outgoing girl who enjoyed a variety of activities, including cheerleading, dance lessons, playing the piano, and swimming. J.B. and her sisters also modeled for several companies. During high school, she met Tracy Hallett, with whom she quickly formed a close friendship. Tracy was born on March 3, 1982, to Carolyn and Robert Hallett, a police officer with the Dothan Police Department. Her life took a dramatic turn when her father died when Tracy was 5 years old. Her mother then married Mike Roberts, who raised Tracy with her mother. Unlike her friend J.B., Tracy was shy but always put others before herself. As the eldest in the family, she took her responsibilities very seriously, especially when it came to her 2 younger brothers. Tracy attended Northview High School, excelling in her studies and participating in extracurricular activities as a cheerleader, often with J.B. As the 2 girls began to enter adulthood, they had no idea of the tragic fate that awaited them. On July 31, 1999, J.B. and Tracy set off from Dothan in J.B.'s 1993 Mazda 929 to attend a birthday party in Headland, a town just a few miles north. However, unfamiliar with the roads, the 2 young women soon found themselves in trouble. Just minutes after starting their journey from home, they became lost. At approximately 10:30 p.m., JB and Tracy stopped at a BP gas station in Headland to ask for directions. The gas station was located near the intersection of routes 173 and 431. Using the pay phone at the gas station, they called their friends to get a better idea of how to get to the party. However, after driving on, JB and Tracy found themselves in Ozark, Alabama, about 24 miles northwest of Headland, instead of their intended destination. Still confused about the directions, the girls stopped at the Big Little store at 11:30 p.m. Although the store was closed, they used the pay phone to make another call. This time, Tracy called her mother to tell them they were lost in Ozark and planning to return home. A woman, Marilyn Merritt, and her daughters then stopped at a gas station to buy a soda. Tracy and JB approached them and asked for directions to Dothan. Marilyn explained the route as best she could, and the girls seemed to understand. She found the girls polite and well-mannered and noted that their car was clean. Marilyn recalled that the girls left the parking lot and turned right, as she had instructed. However, at that time, JB and Tracy had not returned home. The next morning, August 1, 1999, around 8 a.m., Tracy's mother contacted the police to report her daughter missing. Police soon discovered their first clue regarding the girl's disappearance. After Tracy was reported missing, police found JB's car on Herring Avenue in Ozark. What was unusual about the discovery was that the car's gas tank, which had been full the day before, was now nearly empty. The car showed signs of having been driven in muddy conditions, but the doors had been locked, although the driver's side window was partially rolled down. There was no evidence of forced entry. Inside, police found JB's driver's license on the dashboard, as well as the girls' wallets, which still contained cash. However, the car keys were missing, and neither Tracy nor JB were found. A fingerprint on the locked trunk lid led police to believe something was seriously wrong. As they surveyed the scene, they suspected the trunk might contain vital clues but were hampered by the lack of a key. However, after 6 hours of investigation, they found an interior latch that allowed them to open the trunk without a key. When police opened the trunk, they made a horrifying discovery: the bodies of 2 girls inside. Both victims were fully clothed, but their pants were soiled from the waist down. Each had been shot once in the head. An autopsy revealed that Tracy had been shot in the temple, while JB had been shot in the right cheek. Tracy's body also showed a 9mm shell casing in her leg, scratches on her arm, and spikes stuck in her jeans. JB's clothes, especially her new shoes, were muddy and dirty. Police discovered that the 2 girls had likely been shot inside the trunk, although initial signs suggested an execution-style killing. After notifying their families of the discovery, an official murder investigation was launched. Police found the girls' wallets, jewelry, money, and credit cards still in the car, indicating that this was not a robbery. Autopsies revealed no alcohol or drugs in the victims' systems. Additionally, the autopsies confirmed that neither girl had been sexually assaulted before her death, ruling out a sexual motive. 2 months after Tracy and JB's murders, the State Crime Lab released a report revealing the presence of unidentified semen on JB's clothing and skin. Despite this new evidence, the fingerprints found on the trunk lid remained a mystery, as there was no match in the database. With no clear leads, the investigation stalled. As news of the girls' deaths spread rapidly, police still had few leads to identify a suspect. A reward was also offered to try to gather information related to the murders, but no new leads were discovered. However, police soon received an unexpected breakthrough in the case. A month after the discovery of JB and Tracy's bodies, Johnny William Barentine, 28, a longtime resident of Ozark, came forward to the local police department on September 1st. Johnny claimed to have witnessed the girls' murders. He testified that on the night of the murders, he had gone out to buy milk for his 2-year-old son around the time Tracy called from the Big Little Store pay phone. At 1 a.m., Johnny returned home visibly upset and initially told his wife that he had been hit by a black truck near Herring Road. However, during a 4-hour interview with Ozark police, Johnny gave 6 different accounts of what he knew. He initially told Ozark Police Chief Tony R. Spivey that he saw a black truck speeding away from the area where the girls' bodies were discovered. Unfortunately, his story continued to change and contradict throughout the interviews. Johnny initially claimed that he picked up a tattooed stranger and drove to the Big Little Store. He later said that the stranger got into a car with 2 girls, whom he recognized as the 2 girls who were later found dead. Johnny said that the group drove to Herring Avenue, where the stranger forced the girls out of the car, leading to a struggle as the girls tried to escape. According to Johnny's statement, after witnessing a confrontation, he saw something in the stranger's hand just before hearing 2 gunshots. Johnny then drove the stranger away from the scene before returning home. However, in a conflicting version of events, Johnny admitted to police that he actually knew the stranger he picked up, identifying him as a neighbor who lived nearby. Notably, Johnny's home was less than a mile from where police discovered the victims' bodies. Johnny's story was not convincing to police, and he became the prime suspect in the murders of JB and Tracy. As a result, Ozark police quickly arrested him and charged him with 2 counts of attempted murder. However, several issues with his testimony raised suspicions. Notably, Johnny did not mention any sexual activity that would explain the presence of semen on JB's clothes and body. Additionally, the neighbor he accused had a solid alibi for the time. Johnny initially confessed to making up the entire story to collect the reward money. Despite his admission, the police believed they had the right suspect. At a preliminary hearing on September 21, Alabama Bureau of Investigation Special Agent Charles Huggins testified that Johnny accurately described the victim's clothing and other relevant details, indicating that he was indeed present at the crime scene. Then, at a bail hearing on October 18, Johnny gave another testimony. He proclaimed his innocence, saying that he never picked up a man with a tattoo or witnessed anything on the night of the murder. According to Johnny, he went to the store around 11 p.m. to buy milk for his son and then made up the story to get a reward. The judge denied him bail and he was sent back to the Dale County Jail in Ozark. Throughout this time, Johnny's family members remained supportive of him. They gave interviews to the media, expressing their belief in his innocence and stating that he was incapable of harming anyone. Johnny's attorney, Bill Kimmons, argued that his client had no involvement in the murders of Tracy and JB, emphasizing that the 4-hour interrogation had affected Johnny, who was trapped in his own false confession. Johnny's defense also pointed out that he had only completed 7th grade and part of 8th grade. He said his client was in special education, suggesting he was incapable of planning the heinous crime. After further investigation, it was discovered that Johnny's DNA did not match the semen found on the victim's body and clothing. As a result, he was released from prison on December 17, 1999. In January 2000, a Dale County grand jury chose not to indict Johnny, officially clearing him of any suspects in the murders of Tracy and JB. This development led to a setback in the investigation, with criticism directed at the police methods used and doubts raised about the Ozark Police's ability to handle the case. However, police continued to focus on other potential suspects. During the investigation, a man from Michigan was identified as the prime suspect. He had attended a party the night of the murders near the area and JB's car was later found. The man had left town shortly after the murders, raising suspicion. Police interviewed him 3 times in Michigan but were unable to provide a clear explanation for the 3 to 4 hour gap in his alibi for the night of the murder. However, these statements were never made public by police. The case against him was eventually dropped after DNA evidence proved his innocence. Another key lead police are investigating is the driver of a small white pickup truck that was spotted at the Big Little store. Security footage captured the truck at the gas station when JB and Tracy stopped to call Tracy's mother from a payphone. The video quality was poor and did not show the driver or anyone getting in or out of the truck. It was impossible to follow a digital trail, as there was no record of gas being purchased at the gas station at the time. After releasing photos of the truck to the media, police asked the public for information, but as leads went cold, the driver and truck were never found. The last potential lead was a Mississippi man who had been extradited to Ozark from Jones County on an unrelated charge of possession of drug paraphernalia. The man had stayed with relatives in Ozark for a short time before leaving town 2 days after the murder, prompting police to question him. However, the questioning yielded no significant information and, without evidence, they were forced to release him. A woman contacted police in March 2000, reporting that she had heard screaming and 2 gunshots on the night of July 31, 1999, near Highway 123 South, just inside the city limits. When asked about her delayed report, she explained that she feared being implicated. Police searched the area thoroughly based on her description and found a 9mm bullet, the same caliber used in the murders of Tracy and JB. However, the make of the bullet did not match the brand of the shell casing found on Tracy's body. Furthermore, the bullet had no markings that could be used to forensically compare it to other evidence in the case. Unfortunately, this lead ended up being another dead end for the police. Several leads in the JB and Tracy case eventually ran into dead ends, but police were determined to find a DNA match. As JB and Tracy's grieving families tried to move on with their lives, the case went cold. Years later, however, a dramatic development reignited the investigation. A major breakthrough came in 2015 when Rena, an auxiliary Ozark police officer, came forward and publicly accused an Ozark police officer of killing JB and Tracy and others of covering up the incident. Rena made several serious allegations related to a 1999 incident in Ozark. According to her, a police officer stopped a man named JB on the night of July 31, 1999, looking for cassette tapes containing recordings of conversations. These tapes allegedly implicated Ozark police officers in a cocaine distribution and profiteering scheme. Rena asserted that the search for the tapes ultimately led to the murders of the 2 innocent girls. Rena further alleged that several law enforcement officers knew the identity of the killer but chose to cover it up by destroying evidence. They also allegedly threatened her to keep her from speaking out. She specifically named 3 police officers, Gary Butch Whittington, Rex Tipton, and Eddie Henderson, as harassing and threatening her. Rena further accused then-police Chief Tony Spivey, who led the initial investigation, of being involved in the cover-up. However, she did not reveal the identity of the specific police officer she believed was responsible for the murders. Noted American journalist and newspaper editor John B. Carroll wrote an article discussing the case. John B. believes that the officer involved thought that Tracy and JB would use the tapes as evidence in a trial scheduled for August 2, 1999, just 48 hours after they were killed. However, John B. also claims that Rena was severely beaten with a baseball bat after speaking out, which prevented her from naming the real killer. The officers Rena accused all denied any involvement in the murders of JB and Tracy. Without any physical evidence, none of them were ever officially named as suspects in the case. Regardless, the allegations exploded on numerous true crime websites and social media, leading to a defamation lawsuit. On January 29, 2016, Keith Coffin, Rex Tipton, Tony Spivey, Eddie Henderson, and Gary Butch Whittington, all Ozark, Alabama police officers, filed a defamation of character lawsuit against Rena Crum, John B. Carroll, and Dean Matthews. That case was dismissed in 2018. In May 2016, Rena Crum was convicted of molesting JB's sister and was given a suspended sentence and a $250 fine. Over the years, police investigated multiple theories, interviewed hundreds of people, and took DNA samples from several suspects, but to no avail. It took 20 years and the advancement of new DNA technology before police were able to make an arrest. In March 2019, police sent DNA found on JB's body in clothing to Virginia-based Parabon Nano Laboratories, which specializes in DNA. Using a public genealogical database to analyze the suspect's DNA and match it to genetic information led police to a breakthrough in the case. The new evidence linked DNA found at the crime scene to a suspect named Coley McCraney, a man in his 40s. At the time, Coley was not a suspect in the 1999 murders of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hallett, but the discovery changed everything. Coley, an Alabama native, had led a relatively normal life before his DNA linked him to the crimes. Born in Alabama, Coley attended and graduated from Carroll High School in Ozark in 1992, where he was an accomplished athlete and served as president of the school's library club. After completing high school, he enlisted in the United States Air Force and served from 1993 to 1997. Coley's personal life involved several marriages. He married his first wife in 1992 but separated 2 years later and eventually divorced. During this time, his ex-wife accused him of assault and filed a complaint with the Air Force. After the divorce, Coley remarried in 2001 and started a family with his second wife. With the exception of a child support issue in 1998, Coley has no prior criminal record or criminal history. Coley spent 20 years as a truck driver for various companies in Alabama. In addition to his trucking career, he recently co-founded a church and served as a bishop. At the time of the murders, Coley was 26 years old and lived on Lisenby Drive in Ozark, about a mile from where J.B. and Tracy's bodies were discovered in 1999. 20 years after the murders, Coley was arrested on March 19, 2019, following a traffic stop in Daleville, Alabama. During an interview with police, Coley claimed that he did not know J.B. and Tracy. Police did not provide any information about his possible motive. Coley's arrest took the Ozark community by surprise, especially Police Chief Marlon Walker, who attended school with him. Rena Crum, 53, who previously accused the Ozark Police Department of covering up the killings, withdrew her charges at a hearing in August 2022. Coley McCraney, 49, is facing 5 counts of attempted murder for the shooting deaths of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hallett and is being held without bail in the Dale County Jail ahead of his trial, which is scheduled for April 17, 2023. At trial, Coley admitted that he knew J.B. He had a conversation with J.B. several weeks before the killings in which she introduced herself as Jennifer at the Wiregrass Commons Mall. He testified that on the day of the killings, he and J.B. had consensual sex in his truck. He said he never knew that Jennifer was J.B. Beasley. On April 26, 2023, a jury found Coley McCraney guilty on all charges and sentenced him to life in prison without parole. In July 2023, a Dale County District Court judge denied Coley's request for a new trial. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Velma Barfield. Velma Barfield was born on October 29, 1932, in Eastover, North Carolina, but grew up near Fayetteville. She is the second child in a family of many children and lived a life of abject poverty in rural North Carolina. Her family worked on a small farm growing tobacco and cotton. Her father, Murphy Bullard, was worn down by the struggles of farm life and had a temper as unpredictable as the weather. Velma claimed that her father was physically and sexually abusive to her and her sisters, though other relatives denied this. Her mother, Lillian Bullard, often suffered the most from her husband's anger. In There, love is a luxury that is hard to come by. This causes Velma and her siblings to experience a childhood deprived of affection and constantly threatened with violence. When Velma was young, she noticed the financial differences between her family and her peers. This awareness led to her first criminal activities. She started taking small amounts of money from her father to buy items her classmates had. She became more and more thieving when she stole $80 from an elderly neighbor. When her father found out, he beat her severely, and Velma stopped stealing for the rest of her childhood. Raised in a Christian home, Velma found comfort in her Bible, holding on to her faith despite her troubled home life. She has always considered her early exposure to religion an important factor in her chaotic life. However, as she entered her teenage years, the emotional wounds from her upbringing began to shape who she would become. World War II caused upheaval around the world. The war was over, but it still caused her family more difficulties and stress. Like many of her generation, Velma was forced to grow up early. Her dreams and aspirations are often overshadowed by the demands of life and family responsibilities. However, during this challenging time, her resilience and determination emerged, traits that would come to define her both admirably and tragically. When Velma entered early adulthood, her desire for a life beyond the limitations of her home grew stronger. She dreamed of escaping. At 17, she left school. In her quest for love and stability, Velma joined Thomas Burke, a relationship that promised freedom but brought new challenges. By the age of 19, she already had 2 children, a son named Ronnie Burke and a daughter named Kim. The family lived happily in Parkton, North Carolina, for over 15 years. Velma's life with Thomas seemed to be a hard-won escape from the poverty and violence of her childhood. In 1965, everything changed when Thomas was involved in a serious car accident and sustained head injuries. To manage the intense pain and headaches, he turned to heavy drinking and drug use. His battle with alcohol echoed the struggles of Velma's father, bringing back her past traumas. The abuse and neglect she had promised never to repeat began to affect her own family. The strains of an unhappy marriage, the responsibilities of motherhood, and her past experiences bore down on her. Velma began working at a textile factory but had to leave due to health issues. She needed an urgent hysterectomy, which affected her confidence and femininity. After the operation, she experienced severe back pain and started using prescription drugs for relief. However, she gradually became addicted, which impaired her judgment and led to future tragedies. On April 4, 1969, Velma had an intense argument with her husband. Later that same day, while she and the children were out, the house caught fire. Thomas, who was inside, died from smoke inhalation, and the house was completely destroyed. Velma and the children moved in with her parents. A few months after her husband's death, Velma started dating Jennings Barfield. They got married in August 1970. One day, the couple had an argument, after which Jennings mysteriously fell ill. On March 21, 1971, he died of a heart attack. Velma moved back into her parents' home. Shortly after, her father passed away from lung cancer. In the summer of 1974, her mother experienced severe stomach pain and was hospitalized. After recovering, she returned home. In August 1974, a man Velma was dating died in a car accident. On December 30th of that year, her mother was hospitalized again with severe stomach symptoms. Unfortunately, doctors couldn't diagnose or treat her illness, and she died 2 hours later. No autopsy was conducted. A series of mysterious deaths occurred around Velma. Her son Ronnie expressed sadness and confusion, questioning why God would allow such suffering to befall his mother, a devoted Christian. Meanwhile, Velma's addiction created financial difficulties, leading her to make another poor decision: check forgery. However, her dishonest actions came at a cost. The people around her no longer believed her. In 1975, Velma Barfield was found guilty of writing 7 bad checks and received a 6-month prison sentence. She was let out after serving 3 months. Following her release in 1976, she found work caring for elderly individuals. Her first job was caring for Montgomery Edwards, 94, and Dolly, his 84-years-old wife in Lumberton, North Carolina. Her first job was caring for Montgomery Edwards, 94, and Dolly. Her first job was caring for Montgomery Edwards, 94, and Dolly, his 84-years-old wife in Lumberton, North Carolina. Montgomery passed away on January 29, 1977, after falling ill. Just over a month after her husband's death, in February, Dolly began showing signs of a stomach illness similar to the one that had affected Velma's mother. Dolly's condition took a turn for the worse, and she died on March 1st. Following this, Velma took on the responsibility of caring for 76-years-old Record Lee, who had suffered a broken leg. On June 4, 1977, Record Lee's husband, John Henry, started having severe pain in my stomach and chest along with vomiting and diarrhea. Initially, doctors believed he was suffering from a severe stomach virus. Unfortunately, he did not survive and passed away later that month. Later in 1977, Velma began living with her boyfriend new, Roland Stewart Taylor, who was related to Dolly. He was a widower and a tobacco farmer. The two attended a Pentecostal revival meeting in Cumberland County, where Roland suddenly fell ill with severe stomach pain. He was hospitalized and died a few days later. Those close to Stewart grew suspicious as they witnessed his rapidly declining health. Ultimately, their suspicions led the authorities to investigate Velma, starting a chain of shocking truths that gradually came to light. An autopsy has been performed as part of the investigation into Roland's death. The process was thorough, with each test, interview, and piece of evidence increasing the suspicion surrounding Velma. In a criminal investigation, evidence often comes from a small clue, a moment of intuition, or a previously undiscovered connection. For the team seeking justice for Roland and other victims, this evidence came through forensic evidence. Traces of arsenic were found in Roland's body. Before the autopsy results were announced, Lumberton police received an anonymous call, allegedly from Velma's sister, claiming that Velma had poisoned Roland and others. Velma was subsequently arrested for the murder of Roland. Following Velma's arrest, Jennings Barfield's body was exhumed, and traces of arsenic were discovered. Velma carefully crafted her lies, but they began to unravel. The art of interrogation is very sophisticated, involves back-and-forth communication between investigators and suspects, in which each question is intended to uncover the hidden corners of the human mind. For Velma, the questions the interrogator asked reflected the very questions she had long been reluctant to answer. In the interrogation room, before the clear evidences, the truth was finally clarified. To seeking comfort, Velma consulted a spiritual advisor. She discovered the courage to face her past. For Velma, confessing was a journey back to her soul. Filled with regret, she began to speak. A series of facts, long hidden by fear, shame, poured out. Her confession deeply pained her family, who were unknowingly entangled in her deception. The woman they love commits terrible crimes, causing them to rethink forgiveness and their notions of right and wrong. Velma admitted to poisoning Montgomery and Dolly Edwards, John Henry, her mother Lillian, and her boyfriend Roland. Although arsenic was discovered in Jennings Barfield's body, Velma claimed she did not kill him. Her motive for murder was to steal money from the victim to satisfy her drug addiction. Additionally, she took out a loan in her mother's name. Each of her mistake decisions, stemmed from addiction, greatly affected her life and those close to her. Confronted with the risk of being exposed, Velma made a decision that permanently changed her life. The transition from one crime to another can be a slippery slope. She repeatedly committed the unimaginable. Velma attended her victims' funerals, appearing to genuinely grieve their deaths. The weight of the secret left her alone, but the human mind, skilled at self-preservation, often uses justification to protect itself from harsh realities and finds ways to rationalize even the darkest actions. Velma would steal money from her victims and then poison them if they became suspicious. To outsiders, she appeared to be a devout churchgoer, a caring nurse, and a loving family member. However, she was caught in a struggle between the remnants of her conscience and her overwhelming desire to avoid the consequences of her actions. She forged checks on her boyfriend Roland's account. When he presumably found out, she mixed arsenic-based rat poison into his beer and tea to keep her secret at any cost. At the trial, Velma's defense team argued that she was insane, but this argument was rejected. She seemed unfeeling, even laughing at the prosecutor and applauding the district attorney after his closing argument. The prosecution described Velma as not being a churchgoer as she claimed, but as a calculating murderer, driven by dark motives, stating that she was responsible for her actions and deserved the harshest punishment. Conversely, the defense argued that she was a troubled individual, trapped by addiction, abuse, and uncontrollable circumstances. They emphasized that her mental health struggles are a factor that could reduce her responsibility for the crimes. In the realm of law and justice, the truth is often more complicated, deeply intertwined with human emotions. She confessed to committing 6 murders, but was only found guilty of the first-degree murder of Roland. In December 1978, the jury identified aggravating circumstances and sentenced her to death. At the time, there was no designated holding area for female death row prisoners, and Velma was the only female on death row in North Carolina. As a result, she was held at Central Prison in Raleigh, in a section for prisoners prone to escape and those with mental illnesses. Later, a unit specifically for female death row inmates was created at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women. While on death row, Velma stopped using drugs and expressed regret for how pills had clouded her judgment and damaged her moral compass. In the solitude of her cell, she begins to confront her past. The nights were long, the faces of the victims haunted her dreams, and the silence intensified her thoughts and regrets. In these moments of reflection, Velma became fully aware of what she had done, the lives she had taken, and the pain she had caused. Her discussions with the prison chaplain were not just about appealing for a reduced sentence, but also about understanding atonement and the challenging journey of forgiving herself. While in jail, Velma admitted that she had never been a true Christian, her faith had been superficial. However, as she awaited her trial, she sincerely embraced Jesus, receiving forgiveness and salvation. In her autobiography, she wrote that throughout her life she was burdened by guilt because she did not know she could do better. What was more amazing, she said, was that Jesus was willing to be her friend. Even then, she could talk to him, and he listened. Velma became a dedicated Christian and spent her last 6 years helping other inmates find faith. Velma became a supportive figure for them in her unique way. Her active involvement in the Christian community, Velma had her sentence changed from death to life in prison. She wrote letters to Governor Jim Hunt, arguing that her newfound Christian faith should be considered a mitigating factor. Many Christians across the United States supported her, including evangelists Billy and Ruth Graham, with Ruth regularly exchanging letters with Velma. However, the victims' families thought that Velma's conversion was just a fraud and a ploy for her to avoid the death penalty. They see her as a cold-blooded woman who killed their loved ones. Despite this, Velma remained a devoted mother and grandmother. She cherished family visits every weekend and enjoyed spending time with her children and grandchildren. In 1980, psychiatrist Selwyn Rose evaluated Velma and testified in state court. He stated that she suffered from 3 disorders: multiple prescription drug abuse, an underlying personality disorder, and depression. However, Dr. Rose felt he never had a complete understanding of Velma. Velma's son, Ronnie Burke, asked her if she had killed Thomas. She responded that she was sure she probably did. She couldn't remember clearly but believed she had left a cigarette or match in the bed and then closed the door, leaving her drunk Thomas to sleep in their burning house. Velma admitted to the pastor that she had killed Jennings. She expressed relief that everything had come to light because she feared she might poison her grandchildren. Velma did not understand why she committed the murder and felt unable to stop herself. The governor of North Carolina denied Velma's clemency request, stating that her victims died in a torturous manner. An appeal was made based on testimony from Dr. Dorothy Lewis, a psychiatry professor at New York University School of Medicine. She claimed that Velma suffered from dissociative identity disorder and had shown patterns of manic-depressive disorder earlier in her life. Velma filed her final appeal on October 30, 1984, in the North Carolina Supreme Court, arguing that she was incompetent at her original trial due to her drug addiction. This appeal was rejected in federal court. The day before her execution, she instructed her attorney, Jimmy Little, to withdraw all appeals. In her last hours, Velma chose to reflect and pray, finding solace in her faith. During that time, the renowned pastor Billy Graham spoke with her over the phone, saying that in a way, he envied her because she was going to get to heaven before he did. Before her execution on November 2, 1984, at Central Prison in Raleigh, Velma released a statement expressing her remorse for the pain she had caused. She acknowledged that everyone had suffered, including all the connected families, and offered her apologies. She also extended her gratitude to everyone who had supported her over the past 6 years, expressing appreciation for her family, her attorneys, and all those who had shown her kindness, including the prison department staff. She was thankful for everything they had done for her during those 6 years. She chose cheese doodles and a Coca-Cola for her last meal. She had her final visits with family and friends and mentioned that entering the gas chamber at 2 a.m. would be her gateway to heaven. She wore pink pajamas for the execution, with a stethoscope and heart monitor attached to her chest. A wheeled gurney was brought to her cell, and she was strapped onto it before being taken to the execution chamber shortly before 2 a.m. Outside the prison, several groups of protesters gathered, including both supporters and opponents of the death penalty. Some protesters criticized Governor Hunt for lacking mercy and compassion, believing that the condemned could still contribute positively by helping fellow inmates while serving life in prison. Inside the prison, inmates banged rhythmically on their cell windows as they awaited the execution. Approximately 80 supporters of capital punishment gathered to cheer and applaud. The execution was carried out by 3 volunteers, with 1 intravenous line serving as a dummy so that none of the volunteers knew who actually delivered the lethal dose. Velma was pronounced dead at 2:15 a.m., 15 minutes after receiving the injection of proton bromide. Witnesses to the execution said Velma died peacefully, with no signs of pain. Around 300 death penalty opponents held a silent vigil, holding candles that were extinguished at the moment of her execution at 2:25 a.m. Velma's body was transported by ambulance to a medical school, fulfilling her wish to donate her organs for transplantation. She was later buried in a small cemetery in North Carolina beside her first husband, Thomas. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Melissa Caddick. Melissa Louise was born on April 21, 1971, to Barbara and Ted Grimley. her father working for an insurance company and her mother working as a physiotherapist. Melissa's family was middle class and her parents were active in the Lions Club. Melissa was a quiet child who had difficulty studying but later developed an interest in fashion at an early age. After completing high school, she went on to study secretarial and business studies at Patrick's College in Sydney. Melissa initially worked as an administrator in the investment sector of the National Road Association. She had always been interested in finance. In 1992, after a stressful week, Melissa went out to unwind and have a drink. She ended up meeting a charming man at the bar, and they struck up a conversation. However, it became apparent that the man had ill intentions. He maxed out Melissa's credit cards and stole several valuable items from her home. When Melissa finally realized what had happened, she lost all her money. This experience taught her a big lesson. Sharing financial information and putting trust in wrong people can have serious consequences. Unfortunately, Melissa would later apply this lesson to exploit others rather than protect them. In 1998, Melissa accepted an office administrator position at an investment bank Sydney branch. Her responsibilities included managing large sums of money. Although Melissa had previously experienced the bitterness of being cheated out of money by her ex-boyfriend, but she proved that she was no different from him. 6 months into her role, it was discovered that Melissa had falsified the manager's signature to embezzle $22,000 from the company. When the corporate headquarters became aware of her misconduct, she was allowed to resign voluntarily to avoid police involvement. Furthermore, they did not ask Melissa to return the money she had embezzled, as they considered the amount too small to make a big deal out of it. After a rough breakup with her ex-boyfriend, Melissa decides to focus on rebuilding her personal life. In April 2000, she married a British man named Tony Caddick. Melissa also takes time to lose weight and stay in shape, and she hired a personal trainer to teach her. And he introduced her to various clients, was a financial advisor who managed a currency and finance firm. He was looking for a new office manager, and Melissa saw an opportunity to excel. As their friendship grew, he offered her the role, and Melissa quickly proved herself in her new position. She was diligent and careful, making informed decisions about which risks to take and which to avoid. By 2002, Melissa had sufficient funds to invest $750,000 in the firm, gaining 25% ownership. Her success led to her being featured on the cover of Independent Financial Advisor magazine. Melissa warned investors in the magazine to be cautious of scams and financial pyramids. She advised them to thoroughly check the qualifications and ethics of their financial advisors before making any decisions. However, a year later, Melissa experienced a change of heart and sought to expand her own investments into real estate and the stock market. Melissa's employer had strict policies and refused to support her ambitions, leading to a significant disagreement. As a result, she left the company in 2004, regaining her $750,000 investment. This sudden change prompted Melissa and her husband, Tony, to move to England, a place he was familiar with before their move to Australia. By the summer of 2006, Melissa and Tony had established a comfortable lifestyle in Essex, a picturesque area northeast of London, thanks to Melissa's previous financial success. During this time, Tony qualified as a lawyer, landed a high-profile job. Then they welcomed the birth of their son, marking a joyful milestone in their life together. Melissa struggled with feelings of emptiness, despite significant life changes, such as having children and moving to a new country. With Tony often traveling long hours between Essex and London for work, Melissa often felt lonely at home. Rather than finding a job to fill the void, instead, she became distracted and eventually began an affair with a charming and attractive man named Anthony Khalidi, who happened to be her hairdresser from Sydney. Tony eventually discovered her infidelity a few months later. Melissa secretly spent large sums of money on trips to European cities with her lover, pretending to attend financial conferences to keep up with the latest industry developments. When her husband, Tony, discovered this and confronted her, Melissa became angry and blamed him for her actions, saying he was the reason she had an affair. The argument became so heated that Tony left their home to stay with his parents, temporarily removing himself from Melissa to reduce tension. When he returned a few days later, he found that Melissa had taken their child, most of their possessions, and all their shared savings, selling their furniture and clothes before fleeing to her hometown in Sydney with their son. Upon returning to Australia, Melissa smeared her husband's reputation to everyone, falsely portraying him as the one who cheated, lied, was conservative, and a neglectful father, despite having no solid evidence. She quickly reunited with her new partner, Anthony, after her return to Australia in January 2012. Melissa also took control of their property in England and sold it for a significant $1.3 million. Melissa spent the funds on a life of luxury, moving into a large home with 5 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms in Rose Bay. This is where she began operating a financial pyramid scheme. Throughout her life, Melissa had ambitions of achieving wealth. However, her financial transactions frequently resulted in unfavorable outcomes. Melissa's ex-boyfriend's deception gave her experience, which was to teach her the importance of gaining people's trust in order to manipulate their money. She applied this lesson to her own deceitful practices, including forging signatures on checks, ultimately leaving her husband financially ruined. Melissa was ruthless in using others to get rich. She quickly became bored with her routine and thought about how to achieve her goals. A big plan started to form in her mind. This idea wasn't new to her. She had thought about it for a long time but hadn't acted on it until now. By this point, Melissa had already made a lot of money, but she wasn't satisfied and didn't want to stop. She thought it was too easy to just make money from a few people. Instead, Melissa designed a clever strategy to appeal to a large group of people, join and increase her wealth. In 2012, Melissa began her complex scam by presenting herself as a financial advisor to her friends, family, and acquaintances. She misled her investors by promising unusually high returns on their investments, despite she not having the qualifications or expertise. Once she received their money, Melissa created fake trading account screenshots and sent fabricated monthly reports showing gains of 10, 20, or 30% via email. Melissa's fake successes improved investors' confidence in her. As a result, they invested more money or recommended her to others. Her bank account quickly grew from thousands to millions as she tricked many people, including friends, former co-workers, her personal trainer, relatives, and even her own parents, into giving her their money. With the ill-gotten money she had earned, Melissa's spending became extremely lavish and wasteful. She bought luxury cars, expensive clothing, art, and jewelry, creating a false image of wealth. All of these are from people who have been fooled by her, who had no idea they were financing her lavish lifestyle. Some of her excessive purchases include over $48,000 spent on Chanel products, $275,000 on international travel, $229,000 at Dior, and more than $25,000 on protein shakes. Melissa tried to make her business seem exclusive by telling investors that it was no longer accepting new clients. However, she would later offer them a spot if they invested quickly, making it seem like they were getting a rare opportunity. By 2014, Melissa's wealth allowed her to buy a luxurious $6 million mansion on Orlando Road. The mansion had stunning views of the Sydney Harbour Bridge and featured spacious living areas, a swimming pool, and a large dining room with a panoramic view of the city. In 2016, Melissa gave her husband Anthony a $390,000 Audi R8 as a gift. The car's license plate was customized to represent his music label. Anthony was a musician and part-time DJ. Additionally, Melissa herself owns several expensive cars. Melissa has taken 25 international trips since 2009, visiting places like the ski resorts of Aspen and secluded islands in the South Pacific. However, Melissa's financial situation is complex. Melissa's parents sold the family home in southern Sydney and gave her the money to buy a penthouse in Edgecliff, but on the condition that they could live there for life. However, the penthouse was not jointly owned and was in Melissa's name only. Instead of using the funds to cover the penthouse expenses, she diverted the money for personal spending. One such purchase was a $590,000 diamond. Melissa made her fortune dishonestly and spent millions each year indulging in her extravagant lifestyle. She treated herself to stays at luxury resorts, traveled by private jet, and spared no expense in acquiring whatever she desired. For 8 years, Melissa's complex financial scam went no-have difficulty. She ran a Ponzi scheme, using money from new investors to pay returns to those who invested earlier. Her deceitful actions ultimately earned her around 30 million Australian dollars. Melissa was aware that her actions couldn't last forever, but she chose to ignore this reality. Her fraudulent plan started to unravel in 2019 when the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, ASIC, received a tip that Melissa was working as a financial advisor without the required license. Initially, she was not investigated, but by June 2020, the situation had attracted the attention of investigators. Their investigation found that Melissa did not hold a valid Australian financial services license and had been improperly using a former colleague's credentials, having forged documents by adding her own name to them. The information led to serious concerns for the Commission, especially since Melissa had by then dishonestly taken around 30 million Australian dollars from her clients. To investigate further, authorities closely monitored Melissa's activities for several months, carefully recording each transaction. Their thorough investigation eventually found solid evidence of her deceitful actions on November 10, 2020. This prompted the regulatory body to take swift action by freezing Melissa's assets and taking her passport. The next day, a search was conducted at Melissa's luxurious home, valued at over $6 million. When Melissa seemed extremely nervous, showing that she was well aware of the trouble she was in. Her lavish lifestyle is under threat because of serious charges, and she risks a lengthy prison sentence. After her assets were frozen and searched, Melissa disappeared without a trace early the next morning. On the morning of November 12, 2020, Melissa woke up before dawn, dressed in her running clothes, and left the bedroom without disturbing Anthony, who was still asleep. She put on her sneakers and headed to the front door. The soft sound of the door closing was heard by her 14-year-old son, marking the last time she was seen. Melissa went missing, and 30 hours later, Anthony reported her disappearance to the authorities at 11:30 a.m. The news of her disappearance led detectives to launch a thorough investigation. They were suspicious of her disappearance, especially considering her recently uncovered involvement in fraudulent schemes. Authorities from the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, ASIC, were already investigating her for financial deception, and her sudden disappearance fueled their suspicions. As the days passed, family members grew increasingly worried. 1 week went by without any leads or word of her whereabouts, leaving her family in great distress and them to make public appeals, begging her to come forward or at least let them know she was safe. Melissa's actions had severe consequences, as she was accused of defrauding millions of dollars from influential individuals, including her friends and family. The investors she deceived were aware of how extravagantly she had spent their money. Since they knew where she lived, her disappearance created a puzzling mystery. People speculated that Melissa may have escaped to avoid arrest, or that one of the many investors she had defrauded, feeling angry and deceived, kidnapped her in revenge. Investigators began by analyzing Melissa's phone records and found no activity after she disappeared. They also discovered that she had left her essential belongings, including her phone and keys, at her home. Furthermore, her bank transactions stopped, prompting the officers to review local security footage from the day she vanished. However, they couldn't find Melissa in the footage, suggesting that she may have left the area in a private vehicle or been accompanied by someone. Another possibility was that Melissa stayed close by but remained hidden. But this theory was considered unlikely. As the search for Melissa continued, some people began to worry that she might have ended her own life by jumping off the cliffs near her home. However, her loved ones, including Anthony, refused to accept this theory. They believed that Melissa would never leave her young son behind, even if she was facing serious charges that might result in a relatively long prison sentence or a large fine. The authorities expanded their search to the entire Australian territory, after seizing Melissa's travel documents and thereby preventing her from leaving the country legally. Melissa's sudden disappearance drew extensive media coverage in Australia and internationally. There were reported sightings in Brisbane, Melbourne, and Darwin. As her identity became known to millions, making it difficult for her to escape. Authorities expected that, given her circumstances, Melissa would eventually surrender herself. The case remained unresolved for 101 days. Until a disturbing clue was found on the shore. On February 21, 2021, two people collecting litter on Bunda Beach in New South Wales noticed a grey sneaker from a distance. As they got closer, they found that the sneaker was still attached to a decomposed and discolored human foot, which was emitting a strong, foul smell. The sneaker had washed up on the beach just hours before it was discovered. Notably, the foot inside the sneaker matched the size and characteristics of Melissa's shoes. Forensic experts began verifying the identity through DNA analysis, while oceanographic scientists studied the Tasman Sea's coastal currents to determine how the foot ended up on Bunda Beach, over 250 miles from the Melissa household. 1 week after the discovery of Melissa's remains, DNA testing confirmed a match with a sample from Melissa's toothbrush, and family members identified the sneaker found at the scene as hers. However, despite this evidence, there was still uncertainty about Melissa's fate, with many people speculating that she might be alive. They believed this was possible because Melissa was suspected of collaborating with her spouse and others to swindle investors out of their savings, and they claimed she was not the type of person to harm herself. This led to suspicions that Melissa may have had help faking her own disappearance to avoid punishment, or that someone else was involved in her vanishing. Melissa's life was rapidly falling apart. Being caught would mean losing everything that mattered to her: her wealth, freedom, friendships, and her family. It's hard to imagine what she was thinking on that critical morning. However, experts were puzzled by the discovery of Melissa's badly decomposed foot, fueling speculation about the authenticity of the scene. Interestingly, Melissa had a connection to the beach, where she had spent many summer vacations as a child. This led some to suspect that she might have cut off her own foot and left it there as a red herring to mislead investigators. A theory that has sparked intense debate. Anthony claimed he was unaware his wife's financial activities were deceitful because he really thought their lavish lifestyle was from the legitimate money they earned. There were rumors that Melissa had borrowed money to invest in cryptocurrency, with the intention of repaying her investors and then disappearing. She allegedly planned ways to avoid being detected. Since no new information or evidence came to light, Melissa Caddick was officially declared dead, and the process of dividing her property began. Anthony was dismayed to find that his $390,000 vehicle, along with other assets, was sold at an auction to partially compensate some of the investors who had been affected. The Dew Heights mansion was still legally owned by Melissa. Anthony claimed he needed money to care for Melissa's child because he had very little funds in his bank account, only $19.95. In May 2022, a federal court ordered Anthony to leave the mansion, and by October, the property was put up for sale. Later, Melissa's collection of luxury items, including designer clothes, art, jewelry, and other high-end goods, was sold. The sale proceeds are used to partially repay investors who lost money. Some had invested their entire retirement savings, while others had sold their businesses, hoping to achieve the wealth Melissa had promised.